I have been putting off making this video for a long time, mainly because everything I knew about Butch Cassidy I learned from this movie. The other reason is because Billy the Kid only has one picture, and there's not a whole bunch to work with Butch. But I'll do the best I can. Let's start with a almost perfected 1 minute or less history of Billy the Kid. Born Henry McCarty in 1859, William Bonney, also known as Billy the Kid, was an American outlaw in the Old West who played a big part in the Lincoln County Wars. He killed lots of people, escaped lots of jails, was famous while he was alive, and was gunned down by his supposed friend, Sheriff Pat Garrett, at the tender age of 21 in 1881. If you want to know more about Billy, just watch one of my other videos. Now, what about Butch Cassidy? Well, for starters, his name wasn't Butch Cassidy. He was born Robert Leroy Parker in 1866 and was the oldest of 13 children in a very poor Mormon pioneer family in Beaver, Utah. That's right, his name was Bob, and he was a Mormon outlaw. Try to wrap your head around that one. During his lifetime, Bob, or Butch as we'll call him, had at least 8 aliases. He got the nickname Butch from being a butcher at one time and borrowed his last name from his mentor, Mike Cassidy. Mike taught him how to rustle cattle. His early years were spent as a cowboy in Utah and Wyoming, but when he moved to the mining town of Telluride, Colorado, he fell in with the wrong people, which is usually the way it works with outlaws. His life changed when he and 3 other men robbed the San Miguel Valley Bank in 1889. Butch took his share of the money and bought a ranch in Wyoming. This was his brand for his cows, which were probably stolen. Most experts think this ranch was just a facade for his other activities like stealing horses, because it was the horse thieving that sent Butch to prison for the first and only time in his life in 1894. Here's his mugshot from the Wyoming State Prison in Laramie, where he spent 18 months of a 2-year sentence. Butch was pardoned by the governor, but only if he promised to stay out of trouble. Obviously, that didn't happen because when Butch got out, he started his own gang. He called them the Wild Bunch. I think he stole that name from the Doolin-Dalton gang in Missouri. In just a few short years, Butch Cassidy and his Wild Bunch became the most successful train-robbing gang in history. Butch planned everything and was meticulous about their getaways. After a heist, they would split up to confuse a posse and then lay low for weeks or even months. The Wild Bunch had several hideouts like Robber's Roost in Utah and Brown's Park on the Utah-Colorado border. But most of the time they went to the Hole in the Wall in Wyoming. It was the perfect hideout with a natural setting that was easy to defend. You could see a lawman coming for miles. They built cabins and corrals and would have enough supplies to last for months. They spent so much time there that sometimes the Wild Bunch was known as the Hole in the Wall Gang. In their first heist, a bank in Idaho, they got away with $7,000, which was a lot of money back then. But that turned out to be nothing. It's estimated the Wild Bunch made off with $10 million in today's money. At times, the gang might number 30 members, but at their core, there was only a handful of them. Besides Butch, there was Harry Alonzo Longbaugh. He's also known as the Sundance Kid. And William L.Z. Lay, who was a longtime friend and helped Butch with the planning of these heists. And Harvey Kid Curry Logan, who shot lots of lawmen. Some say he was the wildest of the Wild Bunch. There was Ben, the tall Texan, Kilpatrick, who met with a gruesome death involving an ice mallet during a train robbery near Sanderson, Texas in 1912. This happened right after he got out of sitting in a prison for 10 years. And Will News Carver, who got the nickname News because he liked reading about himself in the paper. After being shot several times by a sheriff and his deputies, they buried Will in Sonora, Texas. His grave marker only has the date he was killed, April 2nd, 1901. He obviously didn't get to read the last article about himself. Will's girlfriend, Laura Bullion, was a member of the Wild Bunch and spent a few years in prison herself. She went straight when she got out and became a seamstress in Memphis. Laura outlived all the gang members and was 88 when she died in 1961. The last notorious member was a Canadian named George Flatnose Curry. He was shot and killed rustling cattle in 1900. And I should probably mention the Wild Bunch's girlfriends, which there were several. Two of them were sisters, Ann and Josie Bassett, who came from a ranching family and were ranchers themselves. They would assist the Wild Bunch in their escapes, but were not considered members like Laura was. Both were involved romantically with Butch when they were younger, but also hooked up with several other members of the gang. They all got around. Ann, also known as Queen Anne, lived to be 77, and Josie, who was married 5 times, was 90 when she died in 1964. Besides trains, the Wild Bunch robbed payrolls, mines, and banks. Their robberies could be spectacular. The one that made them famous and also spelled their doom was the train robbery they pulled on the Union Pacific Overland Flyer in 1899. They blew that train up and ran off with an estimated $50,000. The Union Pacific wasn't too happy, so they hired the Pinkerton Detective Agency to track them down. We'll get back to the Pinkertons in a moment. After their heist, 5 of them took off for Texas to hide and sat down for this photo in a Fort Worth portrait studio, which turned out to be a big mistake. Up until then, the authorities had no idea what most of the Wild Bunch looked like. This picture changed everything and was plastered on wanted posters everywhere. There was also another place in Texas the Wild Bunch frequented, Fanny Porter's brothel in San Antonio. There's always a brothel, you know? That's where they say the Sundance Kid met Etta Place. Etta, whose real name nobody knows, was often described as strikingly beautiful or strikingly pretty. Even the Pinkerton Agency described her that way. I noticed almost immediately that Etta looked a lot like Butch's old girlfriend, Ann Bassett. And I'm not the only one who noticed. So, the Pinkerton Detective Agency. This guy here, Charlie Siringo, was a Pinkerton detective and bounty hunter who oversaw putting Butch and his gang out of business. He did that by chasing the gang all over the country. Most of the gang members either went to their graves or to prison. Now, what makes Charlie Siringo an interesting character in this story was that he was friends with Pat Garrett and spent time with him tracking Billy the Kid back in 1880. Siringo even wrote a book about Bonney in 1920 called The History of Billy the Kid. Charlie Siringo was also friends with Wyatt Earp and survived an encounter with Bat Masterson in a bar. However, Charlie never caught Butch Cassidy or the Sundance Kid. Years later, Charlie wrote in his autobiography that Butch Cassidy was the shrewdest and most daring outlaw of their age. After being chased for 2 years, Butch, the Sundance Kid, and Etta had had enough and boarded an English steamer in 1901. They decided to go to South America. The 3 of them acquired a 17,000-acre ranch just east of the Andes in the Patagonia region of Argentina and raised cattle. Etta actually owned part of this ranch through a land grant she got from Argentina, so they must have liked her too. There the 3 of them lived peacefully for a few years, but for some unknown reason, Butch and Sundance went back to crime when they robbed an Argentinian bank in 1905. The Pinkertons had tracked them to Argentina and sent the authorities there information to identify them, which the authorities did. But they were well thought of in their little town of Cojia, so the authorities did nothing. Sundance and Etta even made a couple of trips back to the States to visit family. But I'm guessing the Pinkertons were closing in on them, which is why they sold their ranch and went back to crime. After another bank heist in 1906, Etta said she'd had enough. So Sundance took her to San Francisco and dropped her off. Etta Place then slowly faded from history and became a legend. Sundance returned to South America, where he and Butch tried to work for a living, but ended up going back to robbing people. Now, this is where history gets a little murky about what happened next. The official story is that Butch and Sundance died in a shootout with the Bolivian army in a little town called San Vicente. But it wasn't the entire Bolivian army like in the movie. It was 3 Bolivian soldiers, the mayor and police chief of San Vicente, along with a few policemen. According to the Bolivians, 2 Yankees robbed a courier of his payroll and were hanging out in San Vicente in a boarding house. This house, actually. The owner of the house recognized a brand on a mule these Yankees had as one belonging to the mine whose payroll had just been stolen. So he alerted the authorities. When they tried to arrest these 2 bandits, a shootout commenced with 1 soldier immediately killed and another wounded. The shootout lasted for hours. In the morning, they found Butch and Sundance dead in their rented room. The Hollywood version has them going out in a blaze of glory. In real life, or at least going by the Bolivian Army's account, it had a little darker ending. It appeared Butch shot Sundance to put him out of his misery, and then Butch shot himself with his last bullet. They had lots of bullet holes in him already, according to the Bolivians, so it seems feasible that's what happened. The Bolivians had no idea who they were, so they buried him in an unmarked grave in the local cemetery. Over the years, lots of bodies have been dug up and DNA samples taken, but so far, no Butch and no Sundance. The stories people have made up about him are even crazier than the ones about what happened to Billy. But unlike Billy the Kid, no one ever claimed to be either Butch or Sundance. So, let's see how Butch matches up to Billy. Let me see, who had more girlfriends? Well, Butch did, and he shared them with his friends, it seems. The most pictures? Butch, but not by much. I think he has a total of 4, maybe 5. Who got arrested more? Billy, by a long shot with 14. Okay, most imposters. Billy had tons of imposters. Everybody came out of the woodwork and said they were Billy the Kid, including this guy, whose name I refuse to say. Okay, who lived longer? Well, Butch did. Butch was a little younger to begin with, but he lived way past 21. Did they both die with their boots on? You know, I'm going with a Hollywood version and say yes. So we'll give him a point for that. Who killed more people? Billy did. He claims he killed 21 people, but in actuality it was more like 9. Butch Cassidy? Well, they say that Butch didn't kill anybody, except maybe that Bolivian soldier, but Sundance might have pulled that trigger. Okay, who has more museums? Well, Billy the Kid has 2 museums, believe it or not. One of them in Texas and one of them in New Mexico. I don't think Butch has any museums, but they do have his boyhood home still. And you walk in there, I guess that counts as a museum, so we'll count him as 1. All right, TV, books, and film. Well, Billy has more books and more television. Butch has 1 film that's just incredible. I just love that movie. All right, I do want to correct something, though. Somebody pointed out to me that Billy the Kid's new TV show is not on Netflix like I said it was. It's on Epix, E-P-I-X. I have no idea who that is, but it's some kind of streaming something or other. You can catch Billy the Kid there. So thanks for pointing that out. Thanks for leaving a nice comment. Who has more Academy Awards? You know, that's not really fair. Butch Cassidy and Sundance Kid had 7 nominations, and they won 4 Academy Awards, including Burt Bacharach, Raindrops Keep Falling on My Head. But Paul Newman played both Billy the Kid, the left-handed gun, and Butch Cassidy in the movies. He was right-handed in Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid, so Paul's pretty versatile. All right, who won this little contest? Well, you know what? As far as I'm concerned, these guys are tied, which is kind of appropriate. To me, the top 3 outlaws from the Old West were Jesse James, Butch Cassidy, and Billy the Kid. Now, Jesse James and Billy the Kid, they were just murderers. Butch Cassidy was, I don't know, he was kind of cool, and not because of Paul Newman. He was just, seemed like a cool dude, and they said he was a really nice person when he wasn't robbing you. All right, the other 2, Belle Starr and John Wesley Hardin, are really close behind. So that's my top 5 outlaws. But what do you think? Huh? Who am I missing? That's all I got.
Some might say that I'm a loner, but I just call it being free. I am my heart's only owner, or at least I used to be. 'Cause now a wildfire is raging deep inside, and my heartstrings are pulling like the tide. And the match that drew a spark was a single stolen key.